welcome. I'm Dr. Infinitely. We spoke on the phone. Yeah. How are you doing today? Sure. Well, I'm very glad you came in. Do you want to know what we'll do today during the first session? Okay. So today is all about us getting to know each other and doing a bit of an introduction. I'd like to know a bit more about what brought you in, and we'll lay out the foundation for the rest of our sessions if you'd like to continue. But first, I just want to know what brought you in, what your concerns are, so then I can adjust my approach to you. Okay, does that sound good? Good. Okay. You have a cup of tea. Is there anything else that you need to feel comfortable? Great. Okay. So let's just get started with you telling me what brought you in today. Yeah. Sure. Sure. So some stress and anxiety as a result of what's going on in the world. Of course, that's completely normal. Very, very common right now. Okay, and how are you experiencing this stress and this anxiety? What kinds of things are happening in your life? You're feeling distracted, hard to concentrate, sure. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Definitely some trouble sleeping as well. And how long has this been going on? Yeah. Okay. So quite a few months now. How have you been coping with this? What have you tried? What kind of strategies? And has anything worked for you? Sure, it's difficult not to see any news or hear about anything. Sure, of course. Yeah. Okay. Well, it sounds like you have a host of different helpful coping mechanisms and maybe some less helpful ones that maybe help in the temporary term. So avoidance, such as reading the news, is definitely a good tactic in the short term, but obviously, as you found, it's a difficult strategy to uphold. Yeah, the meditation and the yoga sound great. Sure, but it sounds like more of the thoughts and the internal processes in your head is what's causing you some of the distress. Is that fair? Okay. And have you been to therapy before? Okay. Yeah, to some counseling during school, but not for a while. Sure. And why is that? Just didn't feel the need. That's completely valid. Okay. And did anything specific happen to make you come in today? Sure. Yeah, that's understandable. Well done for taking the step to come in for some help. I'm here to support you and to talk through things with you. It's a completely non-judgmental space, so you don't need to feel like you have to be a certain way. There's no right or wrong things you can say, okay? Yeah, that's really important because I think sometimes we feel like we have to have everything together. We have to portray a certain persona, maybe at work or in school and our social situations. But I'd like to invite you to leave that all to the side, okay? And when you come in here, it's helpful to let yourself go through the thought process that you're going through so we can explore it together. Sure. So tell me more about what is going through your head or what goes through your head when you're exposed to some of these world events. Sure. Yeah. And how does that make you feel? Helpless, of course. Some despair as well, of course. Well, I think it's natural for all of us to want to see society and the world in a stable, safe place. And sometimes when we feel like that's being jeopardized or there's something that makes us question the way we see society or humanity, like you said, it can be a very difficult thing because those are some of the basic foundations to our sense of security within ourselves, right? Yeah. How about people around you? Do you have a support system and who is in your life that is involved in this process with you? Yeah. Okay. Okay. Good. So, would you like to talk about a few of the strategies or approach elements that we might be using together? Okay. So, my approach to therapy is quite mixed. I try to address the concerns as they come and any presenting issues that you might have, and then try to think about what might be helpful in each different scenario. So perhaps it's talking through things, perhaps it's asking questions, sometimes it's also hands-on exercises, and sometimes I'll bring in resources and paradigms or concepts from the world of psychology to try and help us out. Okay, I don't personally prescribe medication, so if ever we thought that that's an avenue that's worth exploring or you were interested in that, I can certainly make introductions and recommendations, but that's not something that I would personally do. Is that okay? Great. No, absolutely. I'm not suggesting that that's something that we need to think about right now, but it's just something that I always say to make sure I set the expectations for us. Okay. So what I'd like to do today, since it's an introductory session, is just to give you a taster of what my approach might be like with you. Of course, we're able to always iterate and change based on how the sessions are going. It sounds to me like it may be beneficial to look into a few elements of CBT. Have you heard of that before? Okay, so it stands for Cognitive Behavioral Therapy. And CBT is helpful in a lot of different ways, but it's particularly helpful whenever we feel like we're having intrusive thoughts and as a result some unpleasant recurring emotions or feelings that are interfering with our day-to-day life. And when we feel that those thoughts and feelings perhaps have a lot more control over us than we would like. Does that sound familiar? Of course. And it's all about looking at the cycle between what happens externally, any circumstances or events, then the thoughts you might have as a result of those, and how they influence your emotional state. And sometimes having that awareness means that we're able to then explore the relationship between those three elements and question that relationship in our own benefit. So obviously we can't stop what's happening in the outside world. It's not in our control. That's probably some of the anxiety, some of the source of the anxiety. We can certainly have a look at what thoughts we have as a result of those events and how they then affect our emotional state. Does that make sense? Yeah, definitely. It's not easy, right? If it were, then we could all do it all the time, but sometimes it's just difficult to get to a place where you can even start to recognize those three elements. So I'd like to work during our sessions at breaking apart some of those links between those three elements. So as an example, let's take a piece of news that you heard about this week. I know there are a lot, so let's pick one that was particularly troubling for you. What would you say an example of that would be? Yeah, of course. Definitely a very common, upsetting event that happened. Okay, and tell me, try and verbalize when you read that piece of news. What was going through your head? What were you telling yourself? Of course, sure. Yeah. Yeah. And how did you experience those thoughts? What kind of feelings were you having? Okay. Okay. So without giving you the answers, I would like to teach you one of the tools that we'll be coming back to, which is a way for us to examine the thoughts you had and to think about what we call thinking traps that might happen, okay? Thinking traps are particular patterns of thinking that are completely natural and normal to occur, but are sometimes unhelpful for us because they get us into this cycle where we feel the negative emotions coming back and then the thoughts and the emotions reinforce each other. Okay, so it makes a lot more sense once you practice it more and more, and then eventually it becomes second nature. But let's do a small exercise together now. Okay, so I'll give you some of these resources to have a look at, but let's have a look at this right now together. In examining the thoughts you just told me you had, I'm going to read some of the common thinking errors that can occur, and let's explore together, first of all, whether or not they were present in some of what you say, and if they were, let's talk about in what way, okay? So the first very common thinking error, I don't like the word error, I usually call it thinking traps because I think error has this sense that you're doing something wrong, okay? So whenever you experience that phrase coming up in these materials, just, recall the term thinking trap, okay? So the first thinking trap is black and white thinking, okay? Some people refer to this as all or nothing thinking. And what this means is when you tend to think in extremes. For example, a situation can be either brilliant or awful. People are lovely or horrible, or we're perfect versus the worst person ever. So if you think about the spectrum of good to bad and everything that's in between, with black and white thinking, that spectrum goes away and it's either completely good or completely bad. So do you think that that's something that came up for you this week? Yes, that's very insightful. So when you look at that event or that occurrence in history and you say, this is the worst thing ever, there's nothing positive about it, nothing positive can come of it. Exactly. Yes, exactly. You're right. So what can happen is we label it as a very negative thing, and so it makes us unable to see any of the potential useful or positive in some way elements of that situation. It can exacerbate the feeling of negativity and the feeling of anxiety that we get as a result, right? Because nobody wants something horrible that has no upsides to happen. Let's explore a few more. This is a very, very common thinking trap, and it's called catastrophic thinking. Catastrophic thinking is imagining the worst, imagining a catastrophe or a catastrophic outcome during seemingly normal experiences. So you may be sitting around doing your normal routine, and then suddenly you start thinking about something really horrible that may inevitably happen. Yes, I was expecting you to say that, definitely. So I too think that this is a common thinking trap for you and for many people in the current situation. So it's normal to envision, right? Exactly. So when they say that on the news, you immediately go to, oh my goodness, this thing is going to lead to that kind of catastrophe. Yeah. So the issue with that is that we cannot predict the future, okay? Our brain tries to find patterns and predict what might happen to get a sense of control, but our brain can, in doing that, it can actually make a mistake and make things look a lot more catastrophic, a lot more negative than they may actually be in reality. And so it gives us a sense of impending doom that can therefore bring a lot of anxiety into our lives. Yeah. Let's do 3 more, okay? So mind reading. Mind reading is about having thoughts where we predict other people's responses or thoughts. So for example, you trip on the sidewalk and then you think everyone was looking at me and judging me and thinking I'm unable to walk properly, or everyone was making fun of me. Or if you are having a conflict with someone, you think, oh, this is what they were thinking, or this is why they did what they did. Okay. So you recognize that in your life in other situations, but not necessarily in relationships. That's totally fine. So we can definitely come back to that. This is quite a common interpersonal thinking trap for sure. It's one that can also lead to a lot of self-confidence issues. Yeah, definitely comes up with social anxiety. Yeah, okay. So there are 2 more. Disqualifying the positive. So this is when we dismiss or belittle positive achievements or experiences or events, and or we don't recognize our own role in these. So for example, you might say, I only passed my driving test because the examiner felt sorry for me, or I was lucky to get a promotion. So what it can do is it affects the positive meaning that we take from events, and it can make us blame ourselves for events in our lives but dismiss any positive things. Yeah. Okay. Okay. That's very good. Thank you for sharing that. Good. Okay, 1 more, and it's called filtering. This is very, very common as well. This is when we look at the world through a negative or anxious filter, and we're unable to then see any of the positive or good things that happen around us because our minds are only focused on the negative events. So for example, exactly. So when you read the news or you hear the news or there's breaking news or a bad event that is happening, all of a sudden it paints everything gray or black, and you're not able to then enjoy or see the day-to-day positive things that are happening in your life. Exactly, you're right. Exactly, and in turn, it then makes it look as though all that's happening around us is negative. Right, and when they go together with other thinking traps, for example, with catastrophic thinking, together you can then say in your mind to yourself, everything that's happening around me is bad, and it's going to continue getting worse, and there's going to be a catastrophe. Yes, good. So, what we do with these kinds of thinking traps is it's very hard to just take this list and say, okay, I will never do them anymore. It's not about that, okay? It's about when you're starting to feel anxious and you're starting to feel that despair, that depression coming on. Next time, what I'd like you to do is think, what is going through my head? Okay? What are the verbal emotions or the verbal thoughts? How can I verbalize what's actually going through my head in sentences? And sometimes it's helpful to write it down. And when you write it down, you can then have a look and see, are there any of these thinking traps that are coming on? So if you're writing down, this will never stop. It's just going to get worse. Nobody or nothing can stop this. Okay, it's just going to continue getting worse, and then we're all doomed, yeah? Clearly, catastrophic thinking is present there. Or when you say, this past few months, this past year has been nothing but negative things, okay? Everything that's happening in the world is bad. Exactly. So you're starting to see, yeah. Now, it's not that it's wrong to be concerned. It's completely correct to be concerned. And it's understandable to feel fear and concern and worry. What we do with these thinking traps is by recognizing some of these thoughts, we can stop that cycle where they take over for us. They take over our emotions. They make us feel helpless. And then in turn, they can take away the meaning in the rest of what we do in life and cripple us. And I think that's part of what's been happening with you. Yeah. Okay, does that make sense? Good. So what I'd like to do is, when you go away today, think about applying this. And for next time, if you can bring back 3 to 4 examples from the following week, from the week that's starting now after this session, and just write down either thoughts or thinking traps, but with real examples of what's going in your head and when you were able to intercept them. Okay, good. Now what I'd recommend for us to do is start with a series of 5 sessions following today on a weekly basis to start, and then we can evaluate whether the frequency of the sessions can continue how it is, or maybe we have less sessions, or if you'd like to stop completely. Good. Okay. So on your way out, if you could see my receptionist, she can set you up with an account with us and take you through all the practical details and also help you schedule a session for next week. I'm really glad. Good. I'm definitely here for you. Nothing you're going through is abnormal. It's completely ordinary and expected, but I think there's a lot we can do to help you get through this experience in a more positive way and with a lot less anxiety. Excellent. I look forward to seeing you next time.